In the late 4th century, the Pope asked St. Jerome to translate the Bible into Latin. Now, there was a Bible in Latin, but it wasn't that good. And so the Pope wanted one that would be adhered more closely to what the text actually said. And remember, at that time, Latin was the language of the people. So he was translating it into the vernacular, our English. And Jerome agreed to take up this task. And part of it was he had to do something that he found actually very distasteful. He actually had to learn Hebrew, which was very hard for him at the time that he began to do it, and it took him a few years. But then he began to translate it. And though he did have help, the majority of the work of what would be called the Vulgate Bible was the work of St. Jerome alone. He put literally his life, his heart, and his soul to making this translation. And we might ask ourselves why this was so important to him, beyond obviously that the Pope asked him to do it. And that's because St. Jerome truly believed something. He said that ignorance of scriptures is ignorance of Christ. For Jerome, you could not truly know who Jesus is if you couldn't read the scriptures. And for him, it wasn't just the New Testament he was concerned about. It was the totality of the scriptures, what we call now the Old and New Testament. Why? Because the writers at the time of Jerome, the great writers, Jerome himself obviously, but Augustine and Ambrose, John Chrysostom, and so many others, when they looked at the Old Testament, they didn't see it as something alien to the faith. Rather, for them, every passage of it spoke something of Christ. Christ could be seen in this. And really, in a real sense, what they were simply doing was seeing the Old Testament in the way that Christ himself did. Think about what happens in the gospel today. 2 have just come back from encountering Christ, recognizing him in the breaking of the bread. They tell the other disciples what they had experienced, and this was in line with what they had already been hearing. And then Jesus shows up. And what happens? They're frightened. They think it's a ghost. They don't understand who is with them. They didn't get it. And part of that is really understandable if we think about our faith and what we really believe. In certain ways, without faith is incredible. We believe that Mary, a virgin, gave birth to a child. That child would then grow up to perform numerous miracles. But beyond that, he would be crucified, the one thing that's easy for anyone to believe. But then we believe 3 days later, he rose from the dead. On top of that, we don't see him simply as a man. We know that in faith, he is truly God himself, God incarnate. In the person of Jesus, we have a nature that is fully human, 100% like ours, and a nature that is fully God, 100%. But we take it one step further. We believe in one God, but there's sort of three in that. And we can't really fully explain that. Because anyone who tells you that they can, well, I'm telling you, they're liars. It's a mystery. We know it simply because God has told us it. Where? In the Scriptures. The Scriptures are at the heart of understanding who Jesus is. And we see that again in the gospel today. They come to understand when Jesus opens their minds to the Scriptures. It is in that moment that they realize who he is. But remember, at that point, the Scriptures are simply what we call the Old Testament. And again, this is why they were so important to the ancient writers. As we come to understand Jesus, yes, we can for a while focus on one aspect of him in the New Testament, but to truly appreciate who he is, we have to engage the entirety of the gift that God has given us in the Bible. And as we come to grasp that truth and that reality, it helps us to understand what we hear in the other readings. Those who say, I know him, but do not keep his commandments are liars, and the truth is not in them. Because one of the things we come to understand in the commandments is they are not an end to themselves. Their importance is not just in doing them. It's as we open our hearts to the meaning of what the commandments are seeking to teach us. It is there that we discover more about our God. We discover more about Jesus. And that's the point of keeping the commandments. It is through that discovery of who Jesus is that we can grow in a deeper relationship with him. So ultimately, to know his commandments, well, we have to know the Scriptures. They come hand in hand. May we then open to this gracious gift that our God has given us. This gift that allows us to know him, to understand him, to enter into a relationship with him, to understand his love, his compassion, his mercy, and his humility, and his willingness to condescend to become one with us. The Scriptures are an amazing gift. May we allow them to truly open our hearts, that in coming to know the Scriptures, we come to know the life we're being called to live. And in there, discover God, to discover Jesus, and to have that relationship with our God that he desires for us.